ready.
Ok, buongiorno ragazzi, oggi ho un altro ospite d'onore dal nord Europa, direttamente dal nord Europa. Ho con noi un atleta che è stato campione del mondo in IPF nel 2021 e non solo è un campione del mondo, non solo gareggia ai vertici dell'IPF da diverso tempo, perché gareggia da parecchi anni, dopo ci dirà lui, ma è anche a sua volta un coach, è un coach che ha parecchie persone tra le mani, tra l'altro anche atleti italiani che conosco direttamente, quindi questa cosa sarà molto interessante perché l'idea di oggi è di parlare sia di come si allena lui, sia di come lavora come allenatore, quindi se riusciamo a differenziare un po' le due cose sarebbe fantastico, un po' per avere un'idea un pochino di com'è il metodo nel suo paese e come lavora lui. Hello Alex, how are you?
Hello, Simon. I'm doing well. Really happy to be here.
Fantastic. Will you mind have a little bit of a presentation for our listeners?
Yep, definitely. So my name is Alexander Eriksson. I've been in the sport of powerlifting since 2011. So I'm just starting my 13th year of powerlifting. And since then, I've competed at the sub-junior worlds, junior worlds, and open worlds. And I became the first Swedish open men's lifter to win open world title in the classic division. So that's a bit about me.
Well, interesting. You won in the 2021, right?
Yes, I won in 2021.
Okay, and before that you were competing in gear?
Yeah, so I've competed. Well, when I started competing, the only way to go international was doing equipped lifting. So I did equipped lifting for a bunch of years, but I have always wanted to compete against the best. And now with the competition being so tough in the classic division, that's where I want to be.
Your competition is very tight now. The 74. Have you ever thought about going up in the weight class?
Yes. Well, my intention during COVID was to go up a weight class, but already then I've been training for 10 years, and it took. Well, I expected to gain a lot more muscle. So even when I had the nutrition dialed in and I had the good training, I realized it's going to take a lot of time until I can fill out the 83s. And then just in the middle of COVID, they announced that they were going to start competing again. And I was most competitive in the 74. So I didn't really finish the weight gain until the 83 and stayed in the 74 instead.
How tall are you?
167 centimeters.
Oh.
So I'm probably one of the taller 74 kilo lifters actually.
Well, which is tall for powerlifting standards, but it's not it's not in other sports. So I guess that most of the people competing at the world level in the 83 class are around your height.
Yeah, most people in the 83 and some in the 93 as well.
Well, but if you think about that, maybe it depends also on the leverage, because you are of course, you are very competitive in your weight class, and the fact that you are, you have a very skilled athlete, and also you have a very good leverage for some of your lifts, for example, for the deadlift, I guess. So maybe that can compensate a little bit the body weight.
Yeah, and it's like, although the sort of average height in the 74 is shorter than me, you're still an individual, and you can. Well, some people have a really easy time gaining a lot of muscles and moving up in the weight classes. Some find their weight classes in a couple of lower classes. So I guess I have to go with where I can pack on the most muscles. But of course, it helps to. You can't be like 180 centimeters in the 74. You never see that. That's a total outlier, for example.
Of course. So give me a minute, I will translate it, and then we go. Ha fatto una piccola introduzione Alex, mi ha raccontato un pochino diciamo, la panoramica della sua storia nel powerlifting. Lui ha iniziato a gareggiare nel 2011, ha iniziato prima con l'attrezzato e col gear, perché appunto mi diceva che lui, il suo obiettivo comunque era quello di gareggiare contro i più forti, perciò siccome all'epoca sostanzialmente il RAW non c'era e che comunque diciamo tutto l'ambiente era orientato al gear, quello era quello che si era dedicato a fare, che tra l'altro non me l'ha detto e non gliel'ho detto io, non gliel'ho chiesto, però se non ricordo male c'è un record del mondo di punk attrezzato, dopo glielo chiedo per conferma. E poi si è spostato nel Raw perché appunto mi diceva il suo obiettivo è gareggiare contro i più forti, e poi il powerlifting si è spostato sul Raw e adesso sono lì quelli più forti. E ha vinto nel 2021 la categoria meno 74 kg, è stato campione del mondo. Poi abbiamo un attimino parlato di cambiare, di valutare se cambiare o no categoria di peso, eccetera. Mi ha detto che ci aveva pensato, ci aveva anche provato dopo il periodo del Covid, solo che ha detto che si è reso conto che ci vorrebbe una montagna di tempo per salire di peso, che fa fatica a prendere tutto quel peso e a mettere su altri muscoli, e che quindi resterà nella 74 per adesso. E per darvi due riferimenti, lui è 1,67 m come altezza e diceva che sostanzialmente è il più alto della categoria, perché tendenzialmente 1,67 m sono sulla categoria più alta, quindi giusto per darvi dei riferimenti, la gente sotto il 1,70 m gareggia nell'83 e mi diceva che ce ne sono anche di altezza simile alla sua nella 93, che effettivamente ci tornano i conti. E poi abbiamo un attimino parlato anche di discorso leve, non leve, peso corporeo, perché dicevamo come magari il fatto che lui abbia delle doti tecniche particolari e delle leve che magari lo rendono anche forte nello stacco, questo un pochino compensa al fatto che sia un po' più leggero rispetto ad altre persone. Ok, so the first question is about the way your training has changed, moving from gear to raw.
Well, it has changed quite a lot in the later year, but I don't think the biggest change has been moving from gear to raw. The bigger change has been moving between different training methods. Like when I started competing, the only programs you could get your hands on was like Sheiko or some of the Norwegians programs, which are very focused on volume and quite medium intensity and are sort of percentage based. But as I've learned more, especially working with Mike Teixeira with reactive training systems, I think the biggest change has been going from sort of that old style paradigm over to emerging strategies and really working bottom up to find an approach that works for me as a lifter. So that has been the biggest change in my powerlifting training. Then of course, when training with the equipment, you have to develop different skills. Like you still have to have the raw power in the background. So you still need to do your off-season training raw, but you need some skills in the equipment as well. To handle the equipment and to be strong in certain points of the lift where the shirt doesn't help as much or where the knee reps doesn't help as much. So you sort of need to be strong in a different power curve. But sort of the background principles of like handling stress, handling recovery, having sufficient volume, having sufficient intensity, those are similar. It's just a change of which exercises you focus more on from the equipment versus raw, in my case.
When was it when you moved from Sheiko-based program to Tusher?
Well, I think I started working with Mike in 2019, I believe. But had been doing similar things previously. But of course, I didn't have the same guidance. I tried it on my own and tried it based on what you could read on the internet. But it's totally different having a coach guiding you through the process, especially with reactive training system, which is a process rather than just strictly a program. So it's a process of finding out what works for you. So that was from 2019, but I've sort of experimented with it on my own since 2017, maybe.
And at first, when you started with Mike, were you training with emerging strategies or not?
Well, it was inspired by emerging strategies, but it wasn't strictly emerging strategies.
Okay.
That I started when starting to work with Mike.
Okay. So there's a funny thing to say now because a couple of days ago I was talking with an Italian coach, a very popular coach here. We were talking about the fact that the process was the same as you told me here in Italy, because we moved from Shaker-based programs like volume, a lot of buffer, a lot of repetition with middle range weights, and we moved from that to something more, maybe I think specific to for the row, which is a little bit less volume, a little bit more higher weight and less buffer. And a lot of people here now train with RPE or some form of auto-regulations, and it was the same as you told, and it was similar to the period in which people moved from equipped to raw, because this is a thing I would like to know your opinion, because my guess is that if you train for raw, the kind of problem, let's say Shaker style, are maybe not that specific for that goal. What do you think about that?
So you mean that the Shaker is less specific for equipped work? Is that the question, or?
No. The question is, do you think that Shaker style, or at least that kind of style of programming, is more, how can I say it, more specific for equipped than
Oh,
for?
okay. Okay. Well, I think one of the challenges with the equipment when it comes to, for example, working with RP is that, okay, you can have one lift that is super easy in the equipment because the suit is fitting just right and the technique is perfect in that lift, and then you could fail the next rep even if the first one was really easy. So I think that part is a bit harder with RPE. However, I think overall, for example, working with reactive training system, you sort of get a better feeling of your how to manage fatigue and how to plan your stress and recovery in training. Whilst because you always have to be attentive to that. So that helps even in the equipment as well compared to, for example, Shaco. So, but it's quite hard to use RP in the equipment sometimes. So in that sense, it could be easier to have prefixed weights and sort of work top down with that.
Okay. And what about a similar system is the Norwegian style, at least back in 2014,
Yeah.
It's very similar because there were a day in which the national coach of Norwegian went here in Italy and explained their method, and it was very, very, very similar to the Shaker style. A lot of volume and a lot of buffer and practice with perfect form. What do you think about that?
Yeah, as you mentioned, it's a lot of practice, and that practice gives a good sort of awareness of the movements. So, for example, which can help in the equipment, which, for example, if you sort of get out of your bar path in the equipment, if you have trained a lot of different bar paths and you train frequently, your body sort of knows what to do. So I think it's helpful in that sense. However, always when you do higher volume and high frequency, one part that you miss out on is the intensity. So that was something I felt when doing more Shaker based or Norwegian style, is that it took a while. Like I didn't feel super comfortable with the weights on my back until quite close to competition. But when doing, for example, reactive training systems or those approaches, you generally lift heavier further out from competition, or many people do. So it's like all year round you have a feeling how to handle bigger weights in that sense. But
Ok, ho chiesto un attimino, una delle cose più interessanti secondo me da chiedere a Alex era come è cambiato un po' il suo approccio, il suo modo di vedere l'allenamento, di allenarsi. Sto parlando del suo caso specifico, non dico Malena, quando è passato dal gear al raw. Allora mi ha fatto un po' anche qui una panoramica, perché ha detto che è stato un po' un processo con diversi tentativi, si è allenato da solo per un periodo, poi è passato a Mike Tuchscherer, che è stato nel 2019. Abbiamo un po' parlato di come è evoluto anche in generale il mondo dell'allenamento in quegli anni lì, perché di recente, negli ultimi anni, comunque va molto di più allenarsi un po' più tirando le serie, con RPE, con meno buffer, mentre tempo prima, che era un po' anche come si allenava lui, come ci siamo allenati anche noi, erano molto, molto di moda i programmi alla Shake, quindi molto volume, frequenze altine e lontananza dal cedimento, comunque un bel buffer grande, non tirare troppo, tanta pratica, eccetera. E allora dicevamo un po' che col gear è diverso, perché col gear effettivamente devi cercare di raffinare molto il movimento e non puoi più di tanto uscire dalle traiettorie, e fai a fatica a lavorare ad RPE, perché cioè, basta spostarsi un attimino dalla traiettoria, diciamo dalla traiettoria ideale, e magari passi da una ripetizione facile a una ripetizione fallita, quindi anche il discorso di autoregolazione o star vicino al cedimento diventa complicato, e lì è importante essere puliti, essere esplosivi, avere un certo tipo di freschezza. E lui mi raccontava anche di come la linea, diciamo il profilo della resistenza è diversa tra gear e raw, chiaramente, perché è in assistenza di un ritorno elastico del tessuto, e che quindi richiede anche delle caratteristiche diverse. E in più mi diceva che adesso col modo di allenarsi che hai, che dopo è passato anche Emerging Strategies, non subito ma quasi subito con Tuchscherer, adesso è più, diciamo, abituato a tenere pesi alti sulle spalle, e non ha quella sensazione di sentirsi non pronto ai pesi elevati fino a sotto gara, che è quello che invece capitava spesso a lui, ma posso dire anche lo stesso per me, con i metodi basati sulle le filosofie di Sheiko. Poi abbiamo fatto una panoramica con la Norvegia, perché in 2014, giù di lì, poco più, poco meno, andavano in Norvegia dei metodi che erano praticamente molto molto simili a quelli di Sheiko, e anche lì erano basati sugli stessi principi. Ok, so did that change reflect the same kind of philosophy that you applied with your athletes during the period? So at first with Sheiko style programs, and then you, as you moved away from that, also your clients moved away from that?
yeah, definitely. I had to work a bit on my own, trying to understand the reactive training systems before applying it on the athletes. So it didn't change sort of right away when I starting to train more auto-regulated. But now everyone I coach follows principles based on reactive training systems and emerging strategies. And then, of course, that can look very different from client to client. Some may do really high volume, some may do quite low volume, but it's all about sort of following the individual response of the athletes.
Okay. And are you able to plan ahead how long it takes to reach this, let's say, the peak with your clients? Is that something that you can predict?
Yeah, it's quite predictable for most of the athletes. I know how long I can push them before they need a deload, and usually, if I know I can push them for always like 5.5 weeks, then we plan everything as if we're doing 5 weeks blocks. And then sometimes of course, you have to adapt. You can see that an athlete is really fatigued after 4 weeks, or that they can stretch and do 6 weeks blocks from time to time. But for the overarching plan, we sort of plan on the sort of safe side of what we know.
And usually, I can understand it varies and depends on the clients and the characteristics they have. But how long do you find that is the most common period for the athlete to reach the peak?
4 or 5 weeks.
Okay.
So for example, Gustav Hedlund, who I'm coaching, we know that we can push him for 4.5 week. We always know 4.5 week works. 5 weeks works sometimes when he's in good shape. 4 weeks is sufficient some blocks. So for example, in a peaking, we always do on the safe side. So we always do the lower number of weeks. But for example, in off season, when you can get more fatigued without risking the performance in a competition, you can sort of stretch those blocks out a bit.
Okay, and how do you plan the pivot block between the blocks? Do you choose 2 weeks, 1 week? How do you manage that?
It's generally 1 week,
Okay.
but sometimes for timing reasons, you can do that 2 weeks. Or either it could be timing that you need 1 week in between in order to time the peak for the next block, or the athlete can be really worn out, or it could be just other reasons in life. For example, going on a trip or something, then you can sort of have 2 weeks as well. But generally, just 1 week of a deload or pivot.
And back then, when you were trained by Tuscher, how many weeks of pivot week did he use with you?
I generally trained 5-week blocks with 1 week pivot.
Oh wow! Okay, this was in 2019.
Yeah, from 2019 we started.
Oh, that's curious because back then I've been training with emerging strategy by the same team of reactive training system back in 2017 and 18, and for me it was 6-week blocks, and between the blocks there were 2 weeks of pivot, always 2 weeks.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, that's interesting. Okay. Do you find that the athletes need different pivot blocks based on their body weight?
Not well. I can't see like any clear trends based on body weight. Not really based on that. But I actually like, for me, one of the key things about the pivot is sort of getting a fresh start for the next block. So sometimes you just want to do something fun or something that the athlete really enjoys. So I let that dictate a bit more than strictly following training parameters sometimes. Of course, you have to reduce the volume to get less fatigue, and of course you have to do something different. But I also try to make the deload or pivot weeks a bit fun as well, because you have to enjoy the process.
Ok, I'll translate a little bit, give me a moment. Allora, stiamo parlando un attimino delle emerging strategies di Tuscher. Gli ho chiesto un attimino, adesso riassumo perché il discorso è andato avanti un po', più o meno come lo gestisce, se le applica anche sui suoi atleti. Mi ha detto che sì, sostanzialmente è una strategia che man mano che ha sperimentato lui, ha capito un attimino, poi ha iniziato a implementarla anche sugli atleti che segue e lo fa fare in qualche forma o variante, lo fa fare bene o male alla maggioranza. Come sapete, no, le emerging strategies hanno una struttura, un microciclo di una settimana che si ripete finché la prestazione continua a migliorare, e quando si arriva al picco di fatica si fa uno scarico che lo stavamo chiamando pivot week. Lui ha detto che la maggioranza delle volte le persone che allena fanno circa 4-5 settimane, circa, o 5 e mezza di blocco di lavoro dove continuano a ripetere l'esposizione. e dopodiché fanno uno scarico che la maggior parte delle volte è di una settimana. Queste settimane di pivot sono di solito una settimana, ma ha detto che varia a seconda di necessità di calendario per programmare, diciamo, la gara con i tempi giusti, o altre varie ed eventuali può essere 2 settimane, però tendenzialmente mette una settimana di pivot che chiaramente è con volume ridotto, un po' più leggera, e deve essere, come dicevo alla fine, anche un po' divertente per essere piacevole. Per quanto riguarda come si allenava lui, con appunto questa strategia, lui ha detto che faceva, se non mi ricordo male, 5 settimane di blocco e poi faceva una settimana di pivot, sempre una settimana. Ok, do you always train people and coach people with auto-regulation RPE, or do you have sometimes fixed percentage, fixed loads, or only auto-regulation?
I would say like 90% of the training sets I prescribed are RP. I do prescribe a few percentage-based sets sometimes, but generally those are sort of preceded by a top set with auto regulations. So if, for example, you do 4 reps at RP 8, you get the estimated daily max from that, and then you calculate your percentage based on that. And that's mainly for like lower intensity work. We know it's going to be under RP6, RP7, and that's sort of hard to sort of find that weight in each and every set.
Okay, and how often do you plan on you or your athletes heavy singles? And by heavy, I mean RP8 or over.
Yeah, so generally most of the athletes I coach, they do heavy singles for 8 to 10 weeks before the competition. So you have sort of one block just to get used to doing singles, because that in itself is a skill. And the peaking block is to get better at singles. But I actually do also have some athletes that don't really do any singles before a competition, because we have seen that it works better with, for example, sets of 3, and they don't need to touch heavy singles in the same way. So that's most of the athletes have singles to the 2 blocks leading into competition, and then it depends a bit during the rest of the year. Some athletes might do singles all year round, because that's might be a skill that we need to work on. And other athletes might just have it the 2 blocks leading into competition.
How long did it take for you to understand that this particular athlete needs to practice with, for example, settles free even before the competition? How long did the process take?
Oh, to sort of know that kind of details leading up to competition, you probably need to have done like 3 or 4 competitions with athletes, where you have to sort of try it. Okay, we have tried singles. I always try singles the first time, because that's the most intuitive thing to do. So like the first 1 or 2 competition, if we have tried singles and the athlete doesn't really get a good feeling with the singles, then for like the third competition, we might try doing triples instead, or doing heavy sets of 2, or not emphasizing the singles as much. We might still do the singles, but that might not be the key sets. And sort of after that third competition, you can sort of say, okay, the athlete felt better doing this approach than that approach. And then you get a sense of, okay, what does work for the athlete leading into competition. But I always try singles first.
Yeah, I think it's also sometimes very hard for a coach to understand that, because first you need time. Second, you need athletes that are how can I say that, they are constant. You know, they are living a life of an athlete with every variable still. And then you have to mix in the factors that sometimes you practice singles make you feeling more confident with the heavy weights, but it doesn't necessarily mean that it's the best thing for you to improve. So there are some athletes that want to feel the weight, but they don't need to.
Yeah,
Okay.
definitely agree with that.
Okay, and so you told me that around 8 to 10 weeks out from the competition, in 90% of the cases, you have them during the peak block practice with singles. And um, how often are that singles?
So generally once per week in each lift during that time.
Okay, so the main session with deadlift, one heavy single, and then some volume work, I guess.
Yeah, that would be the general approach.
Okay, and just one even for the bench?
Well, bench, yeah, generally one. However, I might throw in a few variations where we do heavy singles as well.
Mm.
For example, like heavy singles in free count bench or bench against bands or any other variation that we have found helpful for the lifter.
And what about, sorry, go ahead.
Yep, yeah, that was it.
What about yourself? Does it work for you, heavy singles just before the meet?
Yeah, in squat and bench press, I definitely want to do a few heavy singles. But actually, for me, I always do triples in the deadlift leading up to competitions. And like the first time I did that, it felt a bit scary because you have always sort of done singles, uh, but I feel a lot more comfortable when having a bit more speed in the reps in training and doing a few more reps. So, like the first time I did it, I think that was leading up to 2021 Worlds, where I pulled 302.5 on the competition. And the heaviest I've done was a triple with 270. So I hadn't really been close. I've been at like 90% of the weight I pulled, but the deadlift haven't. Well, that was the first time deadlift felt really good on a
Hmm.
competition in a long while. So we just went along with that and focus on speed and a few more reps, and then doing singles.
You know what? This made me think about something because I was talking about the same thing with other coaches here in Italy, and some of them told me that you know what? Sometimes the deadlift just needs some good feelings, but not heavy weight. And as long as you can feel it the way you want to feel them, it's fine. And you push the progression with the squat or other lift.
Yeah, yeah,
Um, um, it seems sometimes a little bit awkward because you're scared because you have never touched any heavy weight and you go in the competition feeling like I have no idea what I can do. But you push the strength with the squat and you kept the skills with the somehow medium weight deadlift with a lot of buffer, and then you go on competition, you're fresh. Your nervous system is
yeah.
very fresh, so sometimes it works well.
Yeah, it's been working really well for me. And looking back at my equipped times, I also had a real trouble finding a good way to peak in the deadlift equipment because well, then you have to get a good feeling and you have to get a good feeling for the suit. Uh, and it's hard to do a lot of reps in the suit because the suit sort of slides around in between each rep and that leads to different reps each time. So so what I ended up doing, which was quite successfully when peaking the last times in competition, is that uh, I did like 5 to 8 singles, but like every minute on the minute.
Hmm.
Uh, and it was on a medium weight. Uh, so I just kept the suit on for like 10, 15 minutes and did all of my singles with one minute in between. Just and that helped me maintain a really good feeling. And then when I pulled on competition, like it felt really good. So
Do you think there is some difference in this strategy between people with different leverages? Let me explain. My guess is that if a person has good leverage on deadlift and high weight, very heavy maximum weight, Maybe for him, he doesn't need to practice that often heavy singles, and he needs to have the good feeling and sensation about the lift, that is everything is in place, they think is fine, everything is okay. But maybe for lower level lifters with not that good leverages and not that high one rep max, maybe sometimes they need to practice a little bit often heavier weight. What do you think about that?
Ooh, that's a hard one to say. It's like always into competition, you want to sort of practice sufficiently heavy to get a challenge that's similar to the competition day. It shouldn't be a max, but it shouldn't be like you show up to competition and you don't know how to use your muscles. And I'm not sure if it would be a difference between beginners and elite athletes here, but I like spinning away on some thinking with athletes with really good leverage, since they need to rely on the technique a lot more.
Mm-hmm.
One of my feelings is that also if you have really good leverages, but you lose technique and you have to
Mm-hmm.
grind the weight through, you sort of get a lot more fatigue than someone
Yeah.
with sort of medium leverage and a more grindy style. For example, if the bar travels away from me in the deadlift, well, that's then you have to really grind it grind it through. So
Well, maybe it's a trade-off because having good leverage make the lifting mechanics easier, so you can lift more in a better position. But at the same time, since you have that leverage and advantage, you also lift more weight. So
yeah.
the heavier the weight, the more stress you have on your body. So it's a trade-off. Okay, so give me a moment so I translate because otherwise we go on and on and on. Ok, allora gli ho chiesto un attimino di come gestisce le singole, quanto spesso fa far singole sia lui sia i ragazzi che allena. E mi ha detto che nel 90% dei casi comunque fa praticare le singole alle persone che allena perché insomma è una cosa, è richiesto in gara, è richiesto l'abilità di gestire la singola massimale o quasi massimale, quindi è una cosa che si fa e funziona e quasi sempre lo fa fare per buona parte dell'anno, non tutto l'anno, tutti, ma buona parte dell'anno. Comunque in linea di massima mi spiegava che a 8-10 settimane dalla gara eh, che lo considero diciamo l'ultima fase finale di picco e dopo qua bisogna capirsi un po' con la nomenclatura, comunque diciamo la preparazione alla gara nelle ultime 8-10 settimane lui fa praticare le singole praticamente quasi sempre e di solito ne fa fare una settimana per ogni alzata, quindi una di stacco, una di panca e una di squat. Poi mi ha detto che in realtà di panca dipende, a volte fa farne anche più di una, magari con altre varianti, per esempio mi diceva la panca col fermo lungo al petto o contro gli elastici, che magari può essere che faccia fare anche più di una singola pesante alla settimana, però tendenzialmente fa una seduta principale per ogni alzata in cui fa la singola e poi un po' di back-off del volume. Questo a 8-10 settimane perché ha detto che insomma è l'approccio che di solito funziona e hai anche il vantaggio di sapere in gara cosa farai, di sapere come ti senti con quei pesi, di essere abituato a insomma, usare i pesi alti e tutto quello che ne consegue. Però mi diceva che dopo in realtà è un approccio che va anche un po' personalizzato perché ogni tanto capitano degli atleti che invece rispondono meglio del lavoro mai con più ripetizioni e non facendo le singole. Per esempio capita mai che fanno serie da 3 o da 4 e si preparano fino alla gara facendo serie da 3. E dopo mi ha fatto degli esempi su se stesso che per esempio gli è capitato nel 2021, quando ha vinto il mondiale, che ha detto che è stato il periodo in cui ha sentito meglio anche lo stacco, lui sostanzialmente non ha fatto singole pesanti, non ha tirato lo stacco fino a poco prima della gara, non ha mai tirato e mi pare che mi dicesse che avesse fatto solo una tripla e nemmeno così pesante fino a poco prima, però in gara l'ha sentito molto bene, ha detto che stava molto in forma di stacco e da lì ci siamo collegati al discorso del quanto spesso tirare lo stacco o quanto spesso far singole di stacco. E dicevamo come a volte è un approccio che funziona molto bene, questa è una cosa che è venuta fuori anche altre volte su altri podcast con altri atleti e coach italiani, per lo stacco, soprattutto per chi è forte con carichi alti e ha delle buone leve di stacco, a volte funziona molto bene tenere lo stacco un po' più leggero, un po' più tranquillo, e sfruttarlo come lavoro tecnico dove si vuole cercare delle sensazioni in una certa tipo di posizione, di tecnica, in modo da tenerlo bello pulito e raffinato, e si porta avanti la progressione tramite lo squat, quindi quello è, diciamo, quello che costruisce la forza, e lo stacco resta sempre un po' più fresco lì di fianco come lavoro medio leggero, più tecnico, per avere poi un po' più di freschezza, per non bruciarsi e arrivare in gara un po' più freschi, e questa è una cosa che funziona molto. Da lì poi ho suggerito un po' una mia idea su questa cosa qua, e che questa cosa qui secondo me funziona più facilmente su persone forti con massimali alti e leve da stacco, e funziona un po' meno bene su gente più scarsa che magari non ha ste gran leve di stacco e ha bisogno di farlo, di praticarlo di più, far più roba di stacco, portare avanti la progressione anche in quello. Poi ci siamo un po' persi via con altre digressioni, però sì, è un po' un compromesso, e questo era quello che dicevamo anche alla fine, tra l'avere belle leve ti permette di sollevare più peso, di essere in una posizione migliore, e quindi di essere, diciamo, avvantaggiato, che in un certo senso ti permette di recuperare meglio, quindi di gestirlo anche l'alzata pesante, eccetera. Però c'è il rischio dovuto al fatto che comunque c'è tanto peso, e anche lui mi diceva nel caso suo, per esempio, se si sbilancia un attimino e si stacca il bilanciere dalle tibie, si avanza un pochino, c'è tanto peso, che hai detto sì, ho delle belle leve, però è tanto peso. La sbagli un attimo, sbagli un attimo la traiettoria e poi la paghi, nel senso che ti stanca tantissimo perché c'è tanto peso. È appunto un compromesso tra guadagnarci in efficienza, posizione e recuperabilità dalle leve, ma allo stesso tempo, se si supera una certa soglia di carico, diventa anche più pesante, tassante. Uh. Okay. What about variation?
Yep.
Let's talk about the 8-10 weeks out of competition. So we're still keeping the same period of between the.
Sure.
Um, you told me before that you use one heavy single a week usually.
Yeah. Generally
Um,
one heavy single.
how many variations do you use in that period?
So for most lifters, they have one main session with competition style, and then for the squat and deadlift, they might have a secondary variation, and most have a tertiary variation as well. During off season, we might have a fourth variation as well, for the squat and the deadlift respectively.
So sorry if I interrupt you. One competition day and a variation day.
And then a third variation. It could be on the same day as the second
Oh, okay.
or
Okay.
first, or it could be on a separate day. But for example, for any knee extension movements like squats, pause squats, hack squats, all those kind of things, most have 3 per week, and it could be 2 sometimes, and it could be 4 sometimes as well.
So
So
you
that's for,
consider. Sorry, go ahead. I'm sorry.
yeah, so that's for knee extension and hip extension generally.
So you consider an X squat a squat variation or an accessory work?
Well, I usually like to group it in sort of the function.
Okay.
So the function of extending your knees. There you have the squats. There you have all the squat variations, and there you have the leg accessories as well. So I group in that way to sort of understand the training stress I put the legs through during a training week.
Okay. So how is scheduled and how is split the most common split that you use with most of your athletes? Is it in 4 to 5 days?
Yeah, most like a 4-day split. And for
Mm-hmm.
example, for the squat, a general thing would be to have 2 squat sessions, one with the competition style, and one with a secondary variation such as pause squat, tempo squats, or whatever works for the athlete. And during that same session, or we generally put in some volume work in an accessory, such as a leg press or hack squat or Bulgarian split, something that's easy to sort of gather the volume in.
Okay,
So that's quite typical.
Okay, and is it the same thing for deadlift?
Yeah, that's it's usually similar for deadlift.
And 3 to 4 benches?
Yeah, bench varies a bit more depending on the athlete, of course, but generally, yeah, the lowest number of sessions is usually 3 for most of my athletes, and I have some people benching 5 times a week as well. So
you still keep just one competition style bench, or even more than once?
in bench, it might be 2 for some athletes.
Okay, okay.
So
What are the most used variations for deadlift?
also for deadlifts, I would say pause deadlifts and Romanian deadlifts. That's usually a really good go-to exercise. Pause deadlifts really emphasize the skill of the floor and the stability in the lift. And Romanian deadlifts is just a great way of gathering some volume for the hip extenders.
Okay. What about the bench variations?
Or the bench variation, that varies quite a bit more, depending if the athlete responds better to sort of more chest specific variations or more tricep specific variations. But I would say still like a longer pause bench is something that you would see with a lot of the athletes with like 2 or 3 count pause. But the rest, yeah, it depends on the athlete. Some of the sort of heavier variations that I like is bench press against bands. So that's with your normal grip. It really mimics the movement, although the sort of force curve is a bit different. Bench press to pins, great to develop good stability of the chest and a good bar path. So those and long pause benches are 3 really good variations that are quite specific to lifting heavy. And then, of course, to gather volumes, you have so many things to choose of. You have feet up, you have close grip, you have close grip against bands, you have dumbbells, you have flies and triceps extensions and so on. So that might vary a bit more depending on where we are in training and what the athlete likes as well and what works for them.
Do you usually keep the squat and deadlifts on separate days?
Yeah, if that works for the athletes' sort of weekly schedule, I like them to keep them on separate days.
Okay, and does it happen sometimes to group everything on upper lower split?
Yeah, it's not often, but during some periods, we have done those kind of splits, and that's mostly when we feel that we need sort of more total recovery in between sessions, because like if you do squats on Monday and deadlifts on Wednesday and then squats again on Friday, then for example your hips have just got like 1 day in between each other. But for someone that might get really sore in the hips or the lower back or anything for that matter that's affects both the squat and the deadlift, then it could be a good idea to just do squat and deadlift on Monday and squat and deadlift on Friday.
Yeah, I find it I completely agree with you, because I thought the same thing, and sometimes it's useful to enhance recovery, especially with, sometimes there are people who have some problem with the back if they keep exposing the back on the load and they never rest, because you do a day squat, the day next you deadlift and so on, so you never rest. So sometimes gathering all together helps a little bit with the recovery. So you have a good heavy session and then you rest.
Yeah.
But in that case, do you still use 3 to 5 benches, but just in 2 days, or do you bench a little bit less?
Well, I try to plan each lift by themselves. So if the athlete responds to 4 days bench, then we'll still try to do that. Some of the sessions might get quite big, but if that still works for the athlete, we would run with it. So the bench gets enough stimulation. So, but then, for example, if I have both deadlift and squat on one session, I wouldn't put a huge bench session on that. So that might just be an in-between session, 4 or 5 really good sets, just to get that stimulation, and then plan the majority of the volume on one of the sessions where we don't have any squats or deadlifts.
Just to rest your back between the big movements.
Yeah. Bench press is good rest.
Back in 2018, if I'm not mistaken, in 2018, I create a survey in Italy, and I give it to most of the Italian lifter in the national championship, and the most common split was the 4 days with 2 squat, 2 deadlifts, and 4 benches. And it was very, very, very similar to what you're describing now. And it's still, I think it's still nowadays is the most common one. One day squat, the other day deadlift, and almost every day bench. So 4 benches, or 3 to 5, but most of the time 4. The second session is exactly as you described. So there is the Monday, the heavy competition style squat, and then on Wednesday or Friday, the second squat, which is usually 99% of the time a variation, which is a little bit lighter and a little bit more volume. So it's very, very similar to what you described.
Yeah, it seems like a lot of people sort of end up doing splits like that, both on or especially on the higher levels. But I guess talking about the higher levels, I think that would probably be a bit different if it's starting to become a professional sport. But if you had all the time in the world, then maybe I would split out the sessions to like really short sessions.
Yeah, exactly.
Just squat one day, and then I do
Exactly.
just bench one
That's
day,
perfect.
and so on. But
If you
like,
have, yeah, if you
but
have
to
all the
get
time.
everything to work with, like having a full-time job, having a family, then it's 4 days a week is usually convenient. You can always go 4 days. The sessions might get like 2 to 3 hours for most people, but it's manageable. Like,
Yeah, I think most people will still end up doing something similar even if they had the time, but I don't think they will do that much difference style of training, because after all you have to consider the fact that you still need to recover. So even if you have all the time, I will do personally, I will do as you said, I will split in much more smaller sessions so that I can focus very well. I do, let's say, 1 hour squat and the rest, and all the other time of the day I will use it for some more accessories, some stretching, mobility, other stuff. But the main things are, I think, are still the same. Something extremely interesting is that a year ago, I interviewed here in the podcast Eric Helms, and we talk about the split, and this time the same stuff as we are talking now. And he said that in New Zealand, most people practice with exactly the same split you said now, exactly the same.
That's interesting. That's interesting because, like, independently of who you talk to when you go to a worlds, it's sort of, there might be smaller differences, but you sort of get to that. Okay, you squat and deadlift 2 times a week. and most bench press like 3 to 5 times a week. So yeah, seems to work for a lot of people. It doesn't mean that it has to work for everyone, but that's a good place to start when sort of designing a program, and then you can take it from there to find what works for you.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, you know, the only people that I find out that train with not completely, but different rules are very big, heavier lifters.
Yeah.
And or people on drugs, on a lot of drugs. So they have different rules.
Yeah.
But apart from that, especially in the IPF, most people train the way we're talking now.
Yeah, it seems to end up somewhere there. So.
Why do you think the people on drugs train differently?
Well, I guess if I'm trying to I have never worked with someone with drugs. I wouldn't know exactly how to structure the plan. But for example, when I design a training plan for someone that's a natural lifter, then I would sort of try to get sufficient volume to grow your muscles over time, and then focus the remaining training stress on sort of intensity. So that would be the general approach. Just get sufficient volume to grow and to sort of manage more training over time. But as an enhanced lifter, well, sufficient volume to grow, that's probably just looking at the weights. So it's totally different, and I guess you have to be very mindful of sort of the progressive overload as well, because your muscles will get a lot stronger than you're sort of prepared for. As a natural lifter, you don't really have the problem of getting too strong too fast, really.
Ok. Ho chiesto un attimino a Alex come gestisce la split nella maggior parte dei suoi atleti, e è curioso perché alla fine gira e rigira, vedo che intervistando un po' tutti facciamo tutte cose con una logica molto simile. Mi raccontava sostanzialmente che la split più usata è su 4 o 5 giorni, ma quella di sicuro più comune è quella su 4 giorni con 2 squat, 2 stacchi e dalle 3 alle 5 panche. Di solito fa 2 squat dove il primo è competition style, cioè quindi quello da gara, che è quella la seduta un po' più pesante, e la seconda seduta è una variante quasi sempre, che può essere con la pausa in buca, che può essere con la discesa lenta o roba di questo tipo, e dopo mai sulla stessa seduta ci aggiunge anche dei complementari di muscolazione, come può essere leg press o roba così. La seduta, quella con la variante, e questo è un principio che vale anche per lo stacco, è tendenzialmente un po' più leggera, con un po' più di ripetizioni, un po' più di volume. Lo stacco praticamente mi ha detto la stessa roba, e come varianti usa spesso stacco con la pausa, per migliorare un po' anche la posizione di partenza, mi diceva. E un'altra variante che usa spesso è lo stacco rumeno, perché lo ritiene un buon sistema per far volume, per creare un po' di lavoro. Per quanto riguarda la panca, la maggior parte delle volte dicevo dalle 3 alle 5 panche, a seconda del caso. E come varianti, sì, qua ce ne sono molte di più, molte di più. Ho detto che una che usa lui, che non è così frequente, è la panca con gli elastici, o se no sì, pause lunghe. Ha detto che pausa lunga al petto è una variante che usa molto spesso, su tante persone funziona bene, o con la pausa sui pin ad altezza petto, sia per lavorare sul discorso pausa, sia per perfezionare un pochino le traiettorie, la discesa e le simmetrie. Poi usa anche con la panca paralimpica, che noi chiamiamo paralimpica. Insomma, le varianti sono più o meno sempre quelle. Dopo mi ha detto che chiaramente sono personalizzate a seconda del soggetto, se è un po' più carente del petto, sui tricipiti, insomma, in base a quello che ha da lavorare. E poi niente, abbiamo un po' divagato sul discorso di utilizzare questa frequenza qua e questa split qui, dicendogli che di fatto è quella che tutti quanti usiamo, che anche noi in Italia utilizziamo spessissimo questa qua. Era un po' i dati che ho raccolto dicevano la stessa cosa. E Ha poi parlato, cioè gli ho chiesto se eventualmente gli è capitato mai di fare upper lower o di comunque raggruppare lo squat e lo stacco nello stesso giorno, e mi diceva una cosa interessante che era quella di cui parlavamo anche sull'episodio con Max Buccioni, di come in alcuni casi per alcuni soggetti hanno bisogno di recuperare di più tra un'esposizione e l'altra alla schiena o alle anche, e quindi gli conviene raggruppare nello stesso giorno lo squat e lo stacco in modo da avere più riposo i giorni dopo, e quindi magari fai una sessione dove ci dai più pesante, però dopo hai più giorni di recupero, e questo sia un po' variabile comunque da persona a persona a seconda di come hanno bisogno, e tendenzialmente fare tipo upper lower lo trovano, o comunque con squat e stacco insieme, solo 2 volte a settimana, li trova degli approcci un po' più facili sul recupero. La panca non è detto che la raggruppi su upper lower, ma se quella persona ha visto che funziona meglio con 4 panche a settimana, anche se lo squat e stacco sono raggruppati insieme, comunque mai tiene la panca spalmata su 4 giorni. Poi gli ho chiesto, secondo lui, come mai gli unici che non seguono, diciamo, queste logiche qua, si allenano in maniera abbastanza diversa, sono le persone che utilizzano farmaci, che si dopano, oppure persone molto pesanti di peso corporeo, e mi ha detto che non ha molta esperienza con atleti che usano doping, e che comunque lì le regole un pochino cambiano, no? Perché noi inteso atleti che gareggiano nelle federazioni con il test antidoping, e che presumibilmente si spera siano natural, hanno bisogno di fare un po' più di volume, un po' più di ripetizioni, di costruire un po' di lavoro e di costruire muscoli, e che questi discorsi qua iniziano a essere un pochino diversi quando c'è di mezzo i farmaci e il doping. Uh, Talking about deadlift,
Yeah, yeah.
do you think that for a sumo lifter training regular as well could help?
I think for some it might help. For some, might not matter. For me personally, I do feel that I get quite a bit out of sort of Romanian deadlifts, because it's really challenged the hip extensions, and I can get a lot of volume in. Like doing a sumo deadlift for me, it's a really short range of motion. It's a really low time under tension. So to really get that sort of metabolic stress on the muscles, then I would need to do a lot of reps sumo. But doing a good set of 8 to 12 Romanian deadlifts really hits the hip extensions in a good way. So I think could be helpful to sort of have a few additional exercises than just only the sumo deadlift. But that of course depends a bit on how your deadlift looks as well.
Do you find it easier to recover the Romanian deadlift than the regular deadlift?
Well, I get more sore from the Romanian deadlifts actually.
Muscle-wise, but as for general fatigue?
Yeah. So I get more fatigue from regular conventional deadlifts, but I get more soreness from the Romanian deadlifts. And some sessions I might be looking for soreness, and some session I might be looking for more sort of central stimulation.
Yeah, my general impression is that with Romanian deadlift, you can use it as a stressor that can stimulate the muscles better than the regular deadlift in general, and it suits better with higher repetition, especially with straps and slower eccentric, which is something that sometimes miss in the deadlift training in general, because you don't have that range of motion, you don't have that eccentric component, and it's getting taxing to obtain that in a regular deadlift or in a general sumo deadlift. So sometimes it's convenient to do with Romanian deadlift.
Yeah, definitely. But I feel one of the things which is a positive from like regular deadlift, is that for me at least, I get a lot of static strength in my lower back from conventional deadlifts, because I really have to work with my core and lower back to maintain the position. And I think that might help a bit for the sumo deadlift as well, when you have to pull a really heavy weight off the floor, and you have to just grab the bar and push until it leaves the floor. And if I didn't have sort of that static strength in the core and the lower back, my back would sort of crumble and I would get out of position. So I think if it's something I would get from conventional deadlifts, it's sort of that static strength.
So is that something that you program often with clients or only in particular cases?
No, that's more case to case.
Ok. Ho chiesto a Alex se programma o cosa ne pensa di programmare e allenare il regular per chi fa sumo. Sì, anche qua è una domanda un po' stupida perché è sempre difficile rispondere a queste robe qua, però mi ha detto che sostanzialmente riassumendo lo fa fare solo in alcuni casi particolari se pensa ci sia bisogno, ma gli piace di più come approccio utilizzare lo stacco rumeno, che un po' me l'aveva detto prima, perché mi ero raggiunto anche io un po' io al discorso, perché si riesce a fare un po' più di volume, fare un po' più di ROM, si riesce a strecciare bene nelle eccentriche anche la muscolatura femorali, eccetera, cosa che nello stacco regolare tradizionale si fa fatica a fare, o comunque diventa costoso e faticoso fare, e quindi forse è più conveniente farlo con lo stacco romeno. E poi mi diceva che magari in alcuni casi la regola può essere che aiuti il sumo per la stabilità della schiena, per la tenuta, soprattutto quando si va su pesi molto alti. E sul suo caso diceva che comunque si trova molto bene con lo stacco romeno, mentre su clienti in generale non è che lo programma il regola su chi stacca sumo, ma solo in casi particolari.